right, Scott, we're going into episode 4.
Yeah, we are.
So, first and foremost, I want to thank everybody that has liked and subscribed to our videos. Let's say videos, audio podcast, however it is that you've listened. Thank you, everyone that has. Everything that, all the likes, all the subscribes, every bit of it helps us to keep growing our channel and be able to keep doing this.
Absolutely, it sure does, Brent. It's actually very, I guess you'd say it's a mood booster whenever you open up your analytics and you see that people are actually really enjoying it and listening to it through and through and sharing it, and we're getting more and more subscribers, more and more viewers on all the platforms we're on, and it's really awesome, and we're really enjoying this, and with y'all's support and everything, we hope to be able to continue to provide good quality content for you guys to listen to as well.
Absolutely. So thank everybody, and don't forget to like it, subscribe it, sub to it, whatever it is, wherever you're at. So we're going into episode 4, and this is going to be, as Rick Grimes would say, Dean Coral.
Oh, Dean Coral. Yeah.
So Scott went into this one. He did the research on it. I'm going to hang out. I'm going to enjoy this episode just like y'all are listening, and take it away.
All right, sweet. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a quick brief overview just to kind of give the first couple minutes of the listeners an idea of what they're about to get into. So after the overview, we'll get into the real nitty gritty stuff. So y'all bear with me because it's going to be a long ride here, but it's definitely worth it because it's very intriguing. Tonight we're going to talk about Dean Arnold Coral, and you might hear me refer to him as just Dean. So we don't want to get anything misinterpreted there. Dean was infamously known as the Candy Man, as well as the Pied Piper. He was born December 24th, 1939 in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And at an early age, he would be a candy factory worker until he started his career as an electrical system tester. He died at the young age of 33 on August 8th, 1973 by homicide. Dean was a serial killer, a serial rapist, a hebephile, which describes a person who's sexually attracted to pubescent children between the ages of 11 and 14, as well as being an ephebophile, I guess is how you pronounce that, which just like the previous, he's still into those adolescent children, mid to late adolescency, between 15 and 19 years old. And he was also an abductor. Him himself plus his, I guess you would say, people that were helping him.
So it was more than one person.
Yes. We'll get way into that. In fact, that's actually coming up real shortly in the brief overview here. Dean's signature was to collect the keys of his victims as his trophies. So like whether it be car keys, house keys, anything of that nature, he would keep them and he would actually hang them up in his house or his apartment.
So with that being said, it wasn't just kids then.
It was
I know you
kids
said
and teenagers.
Okay.
Kids and teenagers, all the way up anywhere from age 11 to 19.
Okay.
Nothing outside of 19 that I'm aware of in what I've read.
Any survivors?
Yes, there's 2 survivors that, well, they were survivors, yes, but they were also the helping hands to him. One of them has died. He died while he was incarcerated, serving 6 consecutive life sentences, I think. Or no, he was serving 99 plus years, and then the guy that's still alive is serving 6 concurrent life sentences.
Okay.
His MO varied throughout the reign of his terror, I guess you would say. It kind of involved a little bit of mixture of everything. It involved gagging, torturing, molesting, raping, abducting, and killing. Now, the nasty part about this is how he molested and tortured these kids, man. It's disgusting. He would get tweezers and pluck their pube hairs until they had none.
Oh wow.
Like any on their butts, their groin, everywhere. He would pluck their pubic hairs.
Wow.
He would also insert various objects into their rectums,
Orifices.
orifices, better word. Um, it didn't go into detail on what objects, and I'm kind of glad it didn't because that would make me a little bit more sick to my stomach about reading on this dude. He had a very big problem on chewing on the genitals of his victims.
Was the victims male, female, or
They're
both?
all boys.
Okay.
All boys. Minus one, but we'll get to that.
All right.
Well, so in that case, no, there would be 4 survivors in total. After he would chew on their genitals, he also liked to insert small glass rods into their urethras and then hit it with a hammer and shatter it inside of them.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, this is the torture stage that he would go through, and he would torture these kids for days on end before he would ultimately kill them. Dean killed anywhere from 29 to 76 victims, and the reason the number's so high at 76 is the numbers we have currently are only in Houston, Texas. We don't know what he did in Indiana where he was born. We don't know what he did when he moved to other places. We only have from 1970 to 1973, which is his span of crime. Yeah. And that actually started September 25th, 1970, and it ended August 8th, 1973, because he was murdered by his own 22 caliber long Colt pistol. And his famous last words before he died was, "Kill me, Wayne. You won't do it." I guess Wayne showed him.
I guess so.
I mean, and we got pictures. I'll send Brent the pictures. There's some pictures that we might not be able to post on social media because they are a little explicit. But there's a lot of pictures that are involving this case. Dean was known by the Houston mass murders, which, if I'm not mistaken, Brent, I think it was like a newspaper or a book or something like that. I don't think he was actually classified as a mass murderer. I think it was just put into that, whatever it was. And I'll get to that later on as to why I think that.
The reason Scott's saying that is we was discussing this. He was telling me a little bit about him earlier today. And when he said about the mass murders, I've always been at the understanding that a mass murderer is someone who kills a large amount of people at one time, not like a serial killer where they'll spread everything out. It's a mass murderer is at one particular time.
I take it back. I just Googled it. And the Houston mass murders was linked to him only because of the sheer amount of murders he committed.
So that's the reason they're lumping him into that category.
Correct.
That's just weird, though, that they did that and he didn't do it. All the people at, one consecutive time that it was over time, but they still called him a mass murderer.
Right. But at that time, though, he was also considered the worst example of a serial murderer in the history of the United States.
But no, we're talking, what year was this one? Oh, you said
this was
70s?
73. Okay. I mean, this is before Ted Bundy. This is before Gacy. Any of those real heavy hitters that would take episode on episode on episode to cover. Right. This guy, I guess you could say, set the bar for those heavy hitters to reach. Dean had 2 accomplices that were both teenage boys named David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley. And Henley is one of those 4 survivors. Brooks was the one that passed away. Henley later did, on August 8th, 1973, he did kill Dean with his pistol. But besides that, I mean, that's just the quick short of it.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you're ready to dive deep into the dark intricacies of Dean and his life, let's go on and delve in.
All right. So how far back we going?
We're going to start basically at birth.
Okay.
Because there's some things in his childhood we need to account for.
All right.
And I didn't have time to type this up on my computer because it's such a in-depth.
So we're going to hear your paper.
So you might hear my paper moving around as I go page to page. December 24th, 1939, Dean was born to Mary Robinson and Arnold Corll. He grew up in a strict household by his father, Arnold, who was very abusive mentally, physically, and very hard on Dean himself in particular. But his mother, Mary, was a very well protected person. She liked to protect Dean from society and all the bad that the society could do to him. Now, with that being the case, the mother and father would always have arguments. They would always fight, fist fights, throwing stuff at each other, abusive language, slang, I hate you. I want you out of my house. You need to leave, blah, 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 blah. So,
So they got along brilliantly.
oh, yes, phenomenally. Just great for children growing up.
Right.
His parents would ultimately divorce after one really bad fight where Arnold got way too physical with Mary and started taking it out on the kids as well. Now, I say kids plural because Dean does have a brother. No name to him or anything like that. He is a younger brother to Dean. That's all I know. After the divorce, Mary actually moved to Tennessee with her two sons, Dean and his brother. And while in Tennessee, Arnold, which is their father, would enlist in the Air Force. So that way, because back then, if you were in the forces or military or anything, you had a legal liability to be able to keep in contact with your family. So that's how he made it to where he could stay in contact with his kids.
Okay.
Dean was known to be shy and a very serious child. They kind of put that in there in quotes. I guess you would say kind of like maybe he had some form of mental disorder where he took everything very literal. He also liked to stick to himself. But what's weird about him, or different, I should say, what's different about him in comparison to some of these other characters that we read about, Dean was a very empathetic person for children and their well being at their household. And maybe that comes back to what he had to endure at his house. Dean was diagnosed with rheumatic fever at the age of 7. And the only reason they found out about the rheumatic fever is because he had a heart murmur in 1950 when he went to the doctor. After that diagnosis, the doctor would pretty much tell Dean and Mary, hey, he can't do any physical activities, no outside activities, no PE at school, nothing. Which you can already tell he's going to get bullied. He's going to get picked on in school because of that. So after the diagnosis, Arnold said, hey, I'm going to be a better father, better husband. I'm going to move back in, help you with him. So they got remarried. Then from there, they moved from Tennessee back to Pasadena, Texas, where they remained married for 3 short years because Arnold started doing the same thing, being abusive, this, that, and the other. That divorce happened in 1953, and Mary would retain custody of the two boys, but she was also forced to have Dean and his brother remain in contact with their father per court ruling.
Because of the Air Force?
I don't know if it was because of the Air Force or not. I don't know if he was still, I would assume he was still in the Air Force, but in the 70s, if you enlisted or got drafted, there's no telling how long you were going to be there.
Right.
So after the second divorce, Mary would marry another guy. His name was Jake West. He was a traveling clock salesman, and he particularly traveled to like the Houston, the northwest area of Houston, like Houston Heights and just north. Houston Heights was a big hitter because that's where he sold a good majority of clocks and things, and that's really the only area it says northwest of Houston in the Houston Heights area.
Okay.
After she married Jake West, they wound up moving to Vidor, Texas, and they had a child together, and her name was Joyce. Dean and Joyce became real close. Dean helped take care of her as she was a baby. There's actually some pictures of them two together that I'll share with you, Brent, that you can put on whatever Instagram or what have it.
Okay.
After they had Joyce, Mary liked to make candy. That was her thing. She loved making pecan pralines and pecan barks and things like that. So Jake said, hey, I got a brilliant idea. Why don't we just open up a family candy store? We'll do it in the garage. we'll make everything, wrap it up, and as I'm traveling selling clocks, I can also sell the candy.
So I
So,
see the Candy Man coming into play.
mm-hmm. So that's what they did. Now, at this time, Dean was still in school, but not only did he have school to worry about, he also was working day in and day out, working at night with his new family, where he and his brother both were responsible for running, maintaining, and keeping up with the machines as well as packaging all the products. Literally, they were doing everything except making the candy. Now, like I said before, Jake wound up selling the candy on his routes for clocks. And then we kind of jump a little bit later because so at that time, Dean would have been in middle school.
Okay.
And so from 1954 to 58, Dean wound up attending Vidor High School, where everybody knew him as a well behaved, well mannered student who kept great grades and stuck to himself. He was still known to be a quiet kid, and I guess you would say a loner. Somehow he did wind up getting in a relationship with a couple girls in high school, wound up having a few girlfriends. The only problem is the relationships wouldn't last because the only thing he was really worried about in school was playing in the brass band where he was a trombonist. That's what he did. He was a trombonist. He loved playing the trombone at home, outside, on the streets, while they were making candy, at school. It didn't matter. If he had a trombone, he was playing it.
No kidding.
Yep. And from records, from what his mother said, now a lot of this, the only person that knows any of it is the mom. So I'm sure there's some bias things that did come into play here, but she did say he was a phenomenal trombonist. He was first chair in the brass band. So I mean, that's actually something to brag about, being first chair in band.
Well, that is something to brag about. I tried saxophone. I never came close to. I couldn't even
Really?
get to the last chair. Yeah,
Were you alto?
I don't know.
Did you play like the bass sax or the not bass
The
sax?
the regular one.
Okay, that's an alto saxophone. I was a
Yeah,
saxophonist as well in high school.
my wife was as well.
Nice. Dean wound up graduating in 1958 from Vidor High School. After he graduated, the family moved to the north outskirts of Houston, in that Houston Heights area that I was telling you about previously, for their candy business. Jake wound up selling a lot of candy in Houston Heights, and he's like, hey, you know what? Why don't we? There's a great place here. We'll sell, we'll move. This is where we're going to open the new store up. He didn't give Mary an option now to choose the name or anything like that. So she kind of got a little upset with him. He wound up naming the shop the Pecan Prince. So he's taking what she does and making it all about himself.
Right.
So at that time, without his knowledge, what Mary wound up doing was getting a patent on all the pecan pralines, the pecan barks, everything that she made. She wound up getting a patent. It'll make sense in just a minute. Once the business got off the ground, Mary wound up requesting that Dean move back to Indiana to take care of his widowed grandmother. Her husband had passed away. She was going downhill pretty quick. They just needed somebody to be a caretaker. They couldn't afford health care or anything like that for her. So Dean wound up moving back, where he got into a from what I've read, a pretty healthy relationship with a female. She wound up proposing to him in 1962, and he said, no, I don't want to marry. After he turned her down, he wound up moving right back to Texas, right back to the Houston Heights area, and he rented the apartment that was right above the candy shop.
Okay.
So this goes back to the patent. After Mary got all the patents and things taken care of, she wound up divorcing Jake and opened her own business named Coral Candy Company, where Dean was made the vice president of that company. While being the vice president, obviously they're in the Houston Heights area. They hired a lot of teenagers, cheap work. Back in the 70s, that was fine. There was no child labor issues or anything like that. It's, hey, you want a job? Come work for us. So they went up hiring a lot of the high school and younger teen boys that were looking for a little extra money to come work for them.
Right.
So there was one boy in particular that didn't say his name, but he wound up reporting to Mary that Dean was sexualizing him, touching him inappropriately, grabbing on him, trying to bribe him with money. Well, Mary didn't like that because she just knew her son would never do that. The allegations had to be fake. They're just trying to ruin his reputation. So she wound up firing the kid. Boy, was Mary wrong. After that, Dean wound up getting drafted into the Army, where he would serve for 10 months. After that 10 months, he wound up getting a hardship discharge to help with the family business. And during his 10 months in the military, they said he was outstanding. He had an unbellished record. He was phenomenal. So they went ahead and honorably discharged him and said, yeah, you can go back, help with the family business. That was on June 11th, 1965.
65?
Yeah, 65. When Dean got back, he wound up opening up to some of his close friends, which happened to be teenagers, that he had his first gay interaction while he was in the military, and pretty much told them, hey, you know what? I really enjoyed it. So I hope I don't offend you or anything like that, but I'm homosexual. Once he got back and released the information, got everything off his chest, he started getting a demeanor about him towards the teenage boys that was very off-putting. From what Mary was saying, the demeanor was never like this until he got back from deployment. So I don't know if he had some kind of encounter with a young boy while he was deployed or what happened there. I don't know.
But there was definitely a noticeable change at that point.
A huge noticeable change. She started noticing it. That's when she started saying, okay, well, Dean, you're going to have to start more so playing in the background of the company, do vice president things. Now, this is where it gets weird because she saw this stuff, but I guess it's his mom, so she's not wanting to really see it. She sees it, but she doesn't want to see it. So his nickname, the Candyman, came after she wound up moving the company to 22nd Street, directly across from Helms Elementary School.
That's where she moved.
That's where she moved the whole candy shop. Now he's still working for her at the time.
So that was a if she said he had a noticeable difference against the young boys, that wasn't a very good choice.
It wasn't. It was not.
Candy shop, was it?
That's what I'm saying. So did she see it but not want to see it? Was she kind of putting it off, or just thought that okay, he's just being weird? So this is where his nickname came in, because kids would come out of school, they'd come straight over, he'd hand them out free candy. Oh yeah, here's you some candy. You can come hang out at the candy shop anytime. He wound up putting a pool table in the candy shop so kids could come play pool. Had all kinds of games in there, things like that. So it kind of became a hangout area.
Right.
He didn't really do this to many of the older kids per se, like 15 and above. He didn't really hand out free candy much to them, but it was the younger kids right before 15, that pre-adolescent age. Dean was reported to be very flirtatious towards several of those younger teen males that were actually employed at the candy company, but Mary pretty much put it on the back burner and said, hey, no, that's not true. You're fired. So she went up firing those teen boys as well. So we've got like 4 or 5 reports saying, hey, Dean's flirting with me. Dean's being sexual with me. And she's like, no, my son would never do that.
And just fire him.
So Dean wound up getting in a relationship, not like a, ooh, I love you kind of relationship, but like a overly friendly relationship with David Brooks, which was one of his partners.
Later accomplice,
correct. At the time, Brooks was only 12 years old and in 6th grade, dude.
Oh, wow.
You're talking about a guy that's been in the Army. I mean, he's got to be at least mid-20s by now. Being a close friend with a 12-year-old that's in 6th grade.
Right.
He's also one of the first kids that Dean wound up giving candy to for free. So Brooks, once he gave Brooks candy for free, he pretty much told Brooks, hey, look, if you go and you bring some more kids here, I'll give them some free candy too. And what did Brooks do? He said, okay, cool. That's what I'll do. So I think that right there is what planted that little bug in his brain saying, okay, he's going to be a great accomplice whenever I decide to do what I want to do.
Right. Started grooming him then.
Pretty much. So Brooks wound up joining Dean in very long trips to the South Texas beaches, along with many other boys that were in that same 11 to 14 year range. And the reason
so my question to this is where are these parents at? Like when they're 11 to 14, what kind of 11-year-old is going with think you said this was in 65. Is that correct? You said thing.
Roughly 65 to
So I put him at
67.
so I put him 30 years old, 32 years old. So
Well, he died at 33 in 73.
okay. I thought he was born in 35.
39.
Okay, I had my numbers off. So anyways, the 25-year-old. I mean, now, I mean, before I was thinking he was 30 something. Now 25 sounds even worse. I mean, what parent is letting their 11-year-old go with a 25-year-old to South Texas to go? I mean, it's what?
With a bunch of other kids on top of that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure word gets around in a small town, hey, this guy's he's kind of freaking weird. I mean, they fired all these kids because they were saying he was being flirtatious and sexual. I'm sure moms started talking to moms and word of mouth got around. So that's a good question. Where were the parents?
Yeah. I mean, that's my question of that is how did these kids?
Now I know Brooks in particular did not have a great family. He did not have a good home life. His
Right.
dad was never there. His mom was never there. His dad left. His mom had to work like 4 or 5 jobs just
So
to
for him
help.
to run off, it was easy.
Correct.
Just go do what you want to
Just
go do.
do it and just be back whenever. The main reason that Brooks really liked Dean, and this was quoted by him, was because Dean was the only adult that never judged the way that Brooks looked, the appearance that he had. Now that's pretty sad for a kid at 12 to say that, adults are making fun of you the way you look. So there we go. Another key in the grooming aspect of it.
Correct.
As well as any time that Brooks might have possibly needed any kind of money, Dean was there saying, hey, yeah, I'll give you some money. That's not a problem. I'll give you money. So I think that Brooks wound up having more of like I've never had a father figure. I'm kind of looking up to this guy as a father figure type deal. So he wound up getting a strong bond in that aspect of, hey, I'm looking up to you. The problem that we have is Dean's urges couldn't be controlled anymore. And the only person that Dean trusted was Brooks. So when he finally let those urges take over, he wound up asking Brooks if he could perform sexual acts on him.
Right.
And Brooks said, well, why would you do that? And then Dean pretty much said, well, I'll give you money or I'll give you gifts. So what does the young boy do? He says, okay, money and gifts, that's fine. So Dean's paying Brooks to perform fellatio on him for what, $10, $15, or here's some candy. I mean, it's disgusting.
Right.
It's nasty. So after that, we know that we have our first accomplice, which is Brooks. Obviously, Brooks ain't going to run away because Dean's providing everything that he can need. Only problem is Dean's also being way too sexual with the kid. But Dean only did that a couple times with Brooks and said, hey, I'll stop. I'm sorry. This is inappropriate. I'm not going to do it with you anymore. And that came because Brooks wound up confronting him saying, hey, I don't think this is right. And Dean's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. It's not right. I'm sorry. I won't do it anymore. So after that, that's whenever the 1970 reign starts. Dean was known to have killed a minimum of 28 boys. Now, that's a minimum, aged between 11 and 20. But I never read anything that said about a 20-year-old, so I'm going to say 11 and 19. Most victims would be abducted from the Houston Heights area, which is where he lived.
So let me pause you right there and back you up for a second before we get too far past that. So Brooks was picked on by everybody about his looks. What was the deal? What was he? I haven't seen a picture of him yet.
Let's see if I might have a picture of him actually. I can send you. There's really nothing wrong with the way the kid looked. There's not. He had longer hair. He kind of had a hunchback almost. Here, I'm gonna send you this picture right quick. Had more of like a bob cut. But I mean, in the 70s, that was the thing.
Right.
All right, you should have that picture.
Got it. So would he have scoliosis or something?
I guess he had to have had scoliosis. I mean, because he's got a pretty significant hunch there. But I mean, I don't see why there would be to make fun of the kid about. I don't know.
That's what I was just kind of curious about that. If it
Yeah.
was like,
No, there's no like facial deformities or anything like that. It's just maybe it could also be because of how he dressed or possibly how he carried himself, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
So, Houston Heights area was a low income neighborhood. So, as you know, in low income areas, most of the time parents are trying to take care of their kids. They're going to be working multiple jobs. They can't keep up with their kids at all times.
Right.
So that's why he primarily targeted that area. I think that's just my interpretation of it. Now, Dean's first known victim was Jeffrey Conan, who was an 18-year-old college freshman. This happened on September 25th, 1970, who Conan was actually hitchhiking to go to a friend's parents' house and wound up disappearing. That's his first victim. It doesn't say anything else about where he was buried, how he was killed, or what happened. That's all we know about Jeffrey Conan.
Okay.
After Conan, Dean winds up abducting two other boys, taking them home, tying them up to a four-poster bed. And at the time when Dean already had stripped them naked, was in the process of raping them, Brooks decided, because Brooks had a key to his apartment, Brooks decided he was just going to walk in. And when he did, he interrupted them. Both of the boys were strapped to the four-poster bed, opposite of one another. Dean standing there naked, promised Brooks a brand new car in return for him to be quiet and be silent. At that point, Brooks reluctantly turned away, just turned around, walked out, didn't say anything to Dean, left it alone. Following couple days, Dean shows up with a brand new Corvette. A brand new green Corvette for Brooks. At that point, when he showed up with that Corvette, Brooks said, "Okay, I won't say a word. Thank you for the car."
Hmm.
So after he purchased the car, gifted it to Brooks, he told Brooks that he wound up raping, torturing, and doing all these things to these kids, and he killed them. Brooks didn't think anything of it. He's like, "Okay, whatever. You gave me a car. I'm not going to say nothing." Blah, blah, blah. Problem is this is where he becomes an accomplice, because he offered Brooks $200 for any boy that he could lure back to his apartment. Now,
How
200.
old was Brooks at this time?
So he was 12 when he first met him. I'd probably say 14,
Okay.
maybe.
So not even old enough for the Corvette yet.
No. But he was driving it, and we'll get into that. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but inflation and things, $200 in 1970 is the equivalent to around $1,650 in today's money.
Per boy that he'd bring to him.
Per boy. So we're going to step back just a little bit more on some background knowledge. So I said it before, Dean did have two accomplices, Brooks and Henley, where Henley is going to come into play very soon, and it'll kind of all start to fall in place. The puzzle pieces will match up in certain areas. The victims that Brooks and Henley didn't lure back to Dean were already friends, quote unquote, with Dean. Dean had already acquired a relationship with them, whether that be at the candy shop, playing pool, playing games, what have it. Dean would tell him, "Hey, look, let's meet up at my apartment. I'll give you some beer and some weed. We get high, we get drunk, we can have a good time." And that's how Dean wound up getting the first two kids and many more before Brooks and Henley actually started helping him abduct these kids. It's pretty much just offering them a good time. And once they were passed out, drunk, or just super high off their butts and couldn't do nothing, he would tie them up and have his way with them.
No, he'd usually bring them one at a time. You said the first two, he had two at one time.
Yeah. So he was friends with a lot of these people. Now, the first two that he wound up doing this to were actually workers at the candy shop.
Oh, okay.
So he's like, "Hey, look, after work, this is just me making an assumption. This is how I would think it would have played out. Hey, after work, come up to the apartment. We'll have a little party. Bada bing, bada boom." And then he wound up raping, torturing, and killing them.
Well, seeing being that they were employees with the mother, kept firing everybody. I mean, it would be kind of like a very easy. It seems like it would be an easy way to get them also, because then it's just like, well, they were fired and I hadn't seen them anymore.
Yep, exactly. I actually didn't even think about that, but that makes really good sense. So If they were already friends or employees or acquaintances with Dean, that's how he got them because he already had a relationship with them. But some of these were just customers. Hey, look, here's some free candy. Come up to the apartment. That simple. That's how it happened, and that's scary, dude.
Did all of them take place at the apartment, or does he move to another location?
So throughout the whole, this is kind of jumping ahead, but I'll cover it now. Throughout the whole abduction and raping from 1970 to 73, he was constantly on the move from address to address to address until he wound up moving to a specific place, which was really close to Houston Heights, and that's where he stayed. That was his primary residence at that point.
And how many boys did you say he did kill
At,
ultimately?
at least a minimum of 28.
And that's not a 3-year period.
Correct.
Wow.
Oh, I've got dates. It'll blow your mind at how quick and rapid this dude was going at it. All right, so back to the notes here because I don't want to get too far off track. When Brooks and Henley would lure them back, they had two vehicles, either the Corvette or a van. You know, one of the old school vans, the Astro lines.
Right.
So they would get them in there and say, hey, look, whether that be, hey, you need a ride or do you want to go have a party? Either way, they'd wind up being right back at Dean's apartment, wherever that was at.
I cannot help but just you're talking about this. He's called the Candy Man. You're talking about the van. I just see this white van with, "Hey kid, you want some candy?"
that's where I guarantee that's where it came from.
Oh my goodness.
It's starting to make sense. So once they were back at Dean's apartment, they would either be forced alcohol and drugs until they passed out, or Dean would just pretty much just forcefully grab them and chain them up. Now, if they did pass out, what he would do is he would take those boys into the room. He'd strip them naked or cut their clothes off, tie them to what he quotes as a torture board, which is a piece of plywood that had 4 shackles on it and a hook on the back that he hung on his wall. So he would
There's
either, what is it?
there's somebody else also that
Oh,
had
there
something
is.
called a
There
torture board.
There is. I'll tell you exactly who it is. It'll blow your mind because this guy right here, the Candyman, is who inspired this well-known murderer, serial killer, to do the things that he did. Didn't have a thought in his mind he was going to do it until he read about this guy. It'll blow your mind. Now, we'll get to it. I promise. So either he would put him on the torture board, which is where he did all of his sodomy and urethra acts and things like that, or he'd put them on the bed and then he would sexually assault them. He was known to beat them, gag them, whether that be with cloth, gag ball, whatever, and then torture them immensely, as I explained earlier.
Right.
And some of the kids died from that.
I could imagine.
I mean, that's a lot of, imagine the pain that would.
Yeah. I mean, at a point, your body, your mind's going to just shut you down.
Yeah. So I told you how the torture board was. After killing his victims, he would wrap them up in industrial plastic and tie them up with nylon cord, which he got from the candy shop because the candy shop would make candy, wrap them up in industrial plastic, nylon cord it, ship it off. So he would get everything he needed to bury these kids from the candy shop. So he had 4 different places he would bury his victims. He rented a boat shed, which was really close to Houston Heights area, and it was for the time being, it was a fairly decent sized boat shed. So what he wound up doing was digging a really deep hole in that boat shed. He also had that boat shed was in South Houston, so I mean it's just south of Houston Heights. He buried victims on a beach on the Boulevard Peninsula. He buried them in a wood line near Sam Rayburn Lake, which the reason he would do that is if he took them back to the log cabin that his family owned and did all of his deeds there. Or he would bury them in a beach in Jefferson County. So you got 2 beaches, a boathouse, and a wood line on the Sam Rayburn Lake. First off, my thought is if you see somebody carrying a weird shaped tarp, plastic, onto a beach and digging a freaking hole. Are you not going to report that?
How do you dig a hole deep enough to bury somebody on a beach to begin with?
Dude, I don't know. And it wasn't just burying a somebody. In
It's
these
multiples.
in these places, he would sometimes stack 7, 8, 9 victims in each hole.
Oh, in one single hole?
Yes.
So what was he doing with their bodies? And that just leaving them in the apartment until he decided to take them
Oh
off?
no. He would kill them, dispose of them in the hole, fill the hole, kill another, go back, dig it up, throw them in, put the dirt back in.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that comes in that it's a lot of work, especially when you start hearing these dates. It'll just throw you for a loop. So in most of these cases, Dean forced victims to write a letter or call their family to let them know, hey, I'm running away. I'm not going to come home. I'm tired of it. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm done. And that kind of, I guess you would say it kind of put a dampener on the research that the police could do because, okay, we got 44 missing kids that happened between these 3 years. How many of these are truly runaways and how many of them were actually killed? Because
Right.
that's how many kids went missing between 1970 and 73 was 44 just in Houston. All young boys between 13 and 19.
That's a crazy number.
It's ridiculously high. So after he would do that, obviously he's going to kill them. While Dean was abducting and killing his victims, like we said before, he liked to move addresses. And once he moved to Pasadena, which was relatively close to Houston Heights, he moved to Pasadena in 1973. He stayed there. That's where he resided. So let's say January 73. That was his last residence. Now
Okay.
maybe that's because he died in 73 and he didn't have a chance to move again. Who knows? We're gonna go back. That was just a little quick overview, background on everything there. Let's go back to Brooks now. So Brooks wound up accepting the deal of $200, and he wound up getting paid $400 because he brought two 14-year-old boys named James Glass and Danny Yates to Dean's house. Basically, he saw him at a religious rally. He's friends with these two guys. He's like, "Hey, look, guys, let's come back. Let's come back to Dean's house. Let's have a party." They all knew each other. Dean knew Danny and James. Let's go back to Dean's. Let's have a party. Let's smoke some weed. Let's drink. Blah blah blah. Dean wound up lacing the weed. Got them both passed out, and that's when Dean did what he knew to do. He tied them up. He raped them. Then he strangled them to death with his hands, not with a cord, nothing. He strangled these two with his hands. Those two were buried under the boat shed. And that's on December 13th, 1970. This is when we're going to start getting into the dates, when things start getting real interesting.
See, and that's odd for most people. So for most killers, most of them won't do stuff like strangle them with their
No,
hands, unless they have them under something. I guess you would say, like if they're in plastic or if they have a blanket over or something, because most of them don't want to be that close, because
they don't want to be that
that's
close to
very
death.
intimate. That's very intimate.
Yeah,
You're right there with that person, at arm's length of them. So most of the time, they don't want to be that close.
but take it like this. I mean, he's already shoving things in them and their orifices. He's raping them already. How much
Right.
more close could he get?
Right.
I mean, he's already literally taken their soul from them doing the things he did before he killed them.
Yeah.
So that was December 13th, 1970, 12 days before Christmas. That sucks. The remainder of these are going to be in 1971. January 30th, Donald and Jerry Waldrop were abducted, raped, tortured, and strangled to death. Both of the teens were aged 14 and 13, buried under the boat shed. So you got 4 bodies under the boat shed already. I want you to do that for me. You got something you can write with real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Write down boat shed and just put a tally mark next to each one because I didn't tally up how many were buried in each place, but that would be interesting to hear. So we got 4 at the boat shed already that we know of. Just let me know when you're ready.
Carry on. I'm getting it pulled up. Go ahead.
Okay. There's not a specific date, so they're estimated between March 5th through the 7th. Elmer Wayne Henley, which was his second accomplice, was age 14. He was brought in by Brooks, abducted by Brooks, tied down to the torture board. And then when Dean looked at him, he said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to let you go." So he unshackled him, told him, "You can live, but there's going to be a cost to it." So Henley said, "Well, what's the cost?" He said, "You lure boys back to my apartment for $200 per head. I have a slave ring." Now, this is where a lie starts to intricate into this. "I have a slave ring with young boys, and I need them so I can get paid." Henley denied that he was going to help at this point and said, "If I know of anybody, I'll bring them to you." He wound up disappearing for a little while. So on March 9th, Randall Harvey, which was a 15-year-old, was abducted, raped, and shot in the head and buried in the boat shed. So that's 5 in the boat shed. May 29th, David Hilligist and Gregory Winkle were both raped, strangled with a cord. They said this was a power cord with alligator clamps on each side. And both of those were buried in the boat shed. They were 13 and 16 years old. So that's 7 in the boat shed. August 17th, Reuben Watson Haney, who was 17 years old, was abducted, raped, strangled, and buried in the boat shed. And the last one in 71 was, nobody knows his name because there was no reports of him missing, but they estimated him to be between 15 and 19 years old, and they quoted him to be the swimsuit boy because he was found wearing swimsuits, but his face was so brutally destroyed and all of his DNA was gone, they had no way of finding. And I guess they didn't think to look at teeth or anything like that. But he was also buried in the boat shed.
So 9 in the boat shed.
So far. So now we're going to get into 1972. February 9th, William Branch Jr., who was 17 years old, was emasculated, strangled to death, and buried in the boat shed. March 24th, Henley, this is where Henley started to get into it. Henley led Frank Aguirre, who was 18, to Dean's because his family really needed the money, but he also begged Dean not to hurt the boy. He said, "This is my really good friend. Please don't hurt him. Do what you need to do. Just don't hurt him." Dean gave Henley the money and wound up strangling him right in front of his face. He buried his body on High Island Beach. This is the moment that Henley started to fantasize about the things Dean was doing. Henley had this inkling to want to help Dean. I don't know if he just got off to the matter that he killed somebody in front of him. If it's like some kind of adrenaline dump, I don't know what it was, but this is where Henley started getting really physically involved with Dean in carrying out all these acts.
Okay.
From here forward, Henley becomes Dean's right-hand man, who he would actually assist in the torturing, shackling, and killing of the boys. April 20th, now this is still 1972, Mark Scott was a 17-year-old who was strangled to death. Wasn't raped, wasn't tortured, just killed. And he was buried at High Island Beach, but his body was never recovered. The only reason they know he was buried there is because Henley's the one that said, "Hey, look, we killed this guy and this is where we buried him." They never recovered any trace of anything from him.
I'm surprised they recovered anybody from the beaches.
Well, I don't know where exactly it was in the beach. I mean, it could have been like on a wood line on the beach. It could have been, I don't know.
You know, I mean, that's true. That's true. Whenever I hear the beach, though, I think
You're thinking
out
of,
in the sand.
right.
Yeah.
So May 21st, Johnny Delamay and Billy Balch Jr., who were 16 and 17, were raped, strangled, and buried at Highland. Johnny was strangled, but Billy was strangled, and after he was dead, he was shot in the head. So I don't know if Billy fought back, and that just kind of pissed Dean off even more, so he wound up killing him twice. I don't know. Now, Billy's dad was a police officer for Houston at the time. Keep that in mind. July 19th, Steven Sickman, who was 17, was one of the most brutal attacks. He was bludgeoned to death pretty much. They estimated that every bone in his torso and abdomen was broke. Spine, ribs, thorax, collarbones, clavicle. I mean, everything.
Wow, he went to work on him.
Yeah. Then he was
With,
tortured.
with what? With what?
Just an unknown blunt object.
Wow.
Then he was tortured. They found the glass rod
Mm-hmm.
and immense stretching of other orifices.
Mm-hmm.
After he was tortured, he was still breathing a little bit, but barely. So Dean wound up getting some nylon cord, wrapping it around his neck, pulling it tight until he died. And he was buried at High Island as well. August
So
20.
you're at 5 on High Island now.
Okay. August 21st was Roy Bunton, who was 19. He was gagged with a Turkish towel, which was also bound to his mouth with electric tape and duct tape, then shot twice in the head and buried in the boat shed. October 2nd was Wally Semino, who was 14, and Richard Hembry, who was 13. They were both raped, strangled, and buried in the boat shed. November 12th was Richard Kepner, who was 19. He was raped, strangled, and buried at High Island. Now we're getting into the 1973s. February 1st, which this was one of the biggest gaps he had, was between November and February. He didn't do anything. So February,
Wonder why?
I don't know.
Because he's been busy all the way up to
Yeah.
then. I wonder why the big break.
Was he tired? Was he trying to let it cool off a little bit before he started doing it again? I mean, these are all things that we'll never know the answer to, obviously, but I mean, it's good to question. February 1st was Joseph Lyles, who was 17. He was strangled and buried at Jefferson County Beach. I think he's actually the only one that was buried at Jefferson County. Then we start getting into the Sam Rayburn Lake, June 4th. So February to June was another big break. June 4th, William Ray Lawrence, who was 15, was raped and strangled with a cord and buried at Sam Rayburn. June 15th, Raymond Blackburn, who was 20, was strangled and buried at Sam Rayburn. July 7th was Homer Garcia, who was 15. He was shot in the head and in the chest, thrown in the bathtub, not raped, nothing, just shot in the head, shot in the chest, and left in Dean's bathtub as Dean left to go do whatever he went to do, to die. Once Dean got back, wrapped him up, took him to Sam Rayburn, buried him. July 12th, John Sellers, who was 17, was shot 4 times in the chest and buried at High Island. July 19th, Michael Balch, who was 15, which was the brother to Billy Balch. He was raped, strangled, and buried at Sam Rayburn. Now, something to keep in mind of the Balch brothers, their father was a cop, and after Michael went missing, he started looking into why they both disappeared. Because Billy was apparently the bad kid. He expected that from him, but Michael was not. But their father wound up overstressing himself to the point to where he had a heart attack. He wound up dying while in search for the boys. He was working day and day.
So he got both of those.
Yep.
Sons.
Yep. And they estimated and guessed, I should say, they guessed that he was actually going to go back and try to kill the dad as well, because the dad had so much information on him. I think that it kind of unfortunately benefited Dean in that aspect. All right, so we're getting down to the last 3. July 25th, Marty Jones and Charles Cobble, ages 17 and 18, were shot and buried in the boat shed. August 3rd, James Stanton, who was 13 years old, was raped, strangled, tortured, molested, and sodomized, and he was buried in a boat shed. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where it leads us to our last attempt of rape, and that was on August 8th. Now, I've got to pull it up here. So, August 8th.
As of right now, that's 15 were buried in the boat shed, 7 at High Island Beach, 1 at what was the other one? JC Beach
Yeah, Jefferson County.
and Jefferson County Beach, and then what was the lake?
Sam Rayburn.
Sam Rayburn Lake had 4.
So, how many is that in total?
But after you give us the last one, be 28.
Okay, so right now, what is it? 27?
27.
27? Okay, that's all then. Because these last ones are the ones that survived.
Okay.
So
unless I missed one, I thought he killed 28. So I might have missed
he was
one of
known.
those.
They did say he killed 28. Now, there's also that first one. They don't know where he was buried.
Okay.
So that would equate to the 28th right there. The his first Conan, the first boy he killed. They don't know where he was buried. All right. So Henley was out on a mission to go get some more money. So he wound up picking up a couple kids as they're headed back to the apartment. Actually, he only picked up one kid, and it was his friend. And his name was Timothy Curley. So on the way to the apartment, Rhonda Williams, which was one of their friends, a female friend, was sitting outside because her dad was drunk. She was letting him cool off. They were arguing. Fun thing about Rhonda was she was actually the fiance to one of Dean's already victims, which was the first guy that Henley brought to Dean, the Aguirres. So they picked up Rhonda because she was in a distraught mood. She's like, hey, look, let's just go back to the apartment. Let's get some drinks. Let's have fun. When they got to the apartment, Rhonda walked in. Dean was happy whenever he saw that Henley had brought another boy to him. And then in comes Rhonda. And when Rhonda comes in, Dean gets super enraged, super pissed off. Because she was a female, he did not want any females. He wanted no females at all in his house. So he got pissed off at Henley. So he steps out. He goes to his bedroom. They're sitting down. Henley explains to Dean why they brought her, because the alcohol and all this, her dad was drunk, being abusive. So he said, okay, that's fine. Here, have some beer, have some weed. So he wound up giving him some laced weed. Don't know what it was laced with, but he gave him some laced weed, got him completely passed out. So he wound up taking all 3 of them to his bedroom. He tied one of them to the torture board and 2 of them to his 4-poster bed. At that time, Henley started to wake up, and Dean saw it. So when Dean saw that Henley woke up, he removed the gag from his mouth and pretty much told Henley, all 3 of y'all are about to die. You brought a female to my house. I can't trust you anymore. You're going to die. So
Wow.
So Henley then persuaded Dean. He's like, hey, look, I'm not going to do it again. I promise. If you untie me, I'll help you do whatever we need to do. Let's just get this over with. So Dean untied him, handed Henley a hunting knife and said, cut her clothes off, and you're going to rape her, and you're going to kill her. So at that time, he starts cutting her clothes off. She wakes up. He takes the gag out of her mouth, and Williams asks Henley, is this real? Like, just in complete disbelief, what she's already going through, and then this happens. Henley and both reply in unison and say, yes, this is very real, and you're going to die. Then Williams whispered to Henley and said, why aren't you going to do anything about it? And I don't know if he might have had a crush on her or what, but at that point, he changed. There's a light switch, just click. He grabbed Dean's .22 long Colt that was sitting between both of them, pointed it at Dean, and said pretty much, hey, we've gone too far. We need to put this to an end. We need to turn ourselves in. So Dean standing there naked while he was, having his way with the boy Curly, took a lunge at Henley and started pursuing him. At that time, when he took the lunge, he pretty much, that's where his famous last words come in. "Shoot me, Wayne. You won't do it." As soon as he said that, Henley shot him in the forehead. The bullet did not penetrate his skull, Brent.
Wow, really?
A 22 long did not penetrate his skull.
At nearly point blank.
At nearly point blank, did not penetrate his skull, ricocheted off, and they actually recovered it in the ceiling.
No kidding,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah. So it ricocheted off him, disoriented him for a second, gave Henley a little bit of time, to back up and get a little bit more space cushion between them. Then he shot Henley 2 more times, once in the chest, once in the shoulder. It spun Henley around. Henley, or not, it's not, it spun Dean around, sorry. Spun Dean around. He started running out the door. He got into the hallway. Henley's running after him. Henley gets the revolver, shoots him 3 more times. Boom, boom, boom. All in the back. Drops him dead.
And this was outside.
That was in the hallway.
And okay, in the hallway of the apartment.
In the hallway of the apartment.
Okay, I got you.
So Henley puts the gun down. He starts to walk away after he unties Curly and Williams. He starts walking away, and Williams says, "You have to turn yourself in. You've got to say something to the cops about this." He said, "No, I'm not. I'm leaving." She said, "If you don't, I'm going to." So Henley, thinking that it was going to help his case a little bit, wound up coming clean to the cops about everything. Told the cops where everything was buried, who all was killed. Like, they had a book with each individual name of who Henley had assisted. Henley was keeping track of everything, which led the police to the massive grave sites. I mean, think of how many was at the boat shed? You said 15?
15. Yeah,
How
15 at the boat
deep,
shed.
how wide, and how long does that freaking hole have to be?
Yeah, no, that's a lot of bodies.
That's a lot. And in the course of 3 years, they're not all going to be decomposed that quick.
No.
They're not. So it's thought that the change of heart was because of Williams. But in my opinion, I also think that it's also because of Frank Aguirre, or Aguirre, however you pronounce his name, who was Williams's fiance. When Henley brought him to him, said, pleaded to him, "Dean, please don't hurt this kid. He's my best friend." And Dean did the complete opposite right in front of him. I think that might have also had a factor to play into it as well.
But why did it take so long for him to?
Just maybe because he saw something in her eyes, maybe, or maybe I mean, I don't know. He doesn't talk about it. He won't talk about it. So that's the end of everything about him. We're gonna go into a little more, but
Post.
Yeah, I guess you say a post podcast here. It's just hitting on a couple different things. I mean, we've already talked about one where there was 44 boys that were reported missing in the Houston area during 70 and 73. Now there are some. What is it?
Well, you said Dean. He killed Dean, but now what about him? He turned himself in. What
He
did
turned
he
himself in. He's the one that wound up getting 6 life sentences.
And what about that was Henley?
That was Henley. Brooks wound up getting 4 or 5 99-year sentences. So essentially the same thing. But see, Brooks never helped murder. He never helped torture. All he did was just kidnap and lure them to him.
Yeah, but it's still.
I mean, it's still aiding and abetting. Yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. But Henley got the same freaking punishment, and he's the one that helped kill. He's the one that helped torture, sodomize. Right. I mean, you would think,
get what you're saying, but I mean, at the same time,
in the grand scheme of it, in the grand scheme, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, Brooks didn't help actually torture and all, but I mean,
no, but he delivered.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So there's actually a couple reports that are pretty interesting. There were people that reported 3 boys, 3 young men is what they quoted in the report, carrying a suspicious looking plastic tarp on the beach and burying it late at night. There was like 4 or 5 different reports on that, actually, and they never investigated it.
So they were actually
they were spotted.
Okay, I mean, they were actually reported to the police. Just the police never looked into it.
They never looked into it. I mean, even gave great detail. Tall, younger kid with blonde hair, long blonde hair, crooked neck, real skinny, tall man with a real short, younger boy. So if Brooks, quote unquote, never helped, he was there at least 5 different times to help bury the body.
Right.
So something in his stories didn't line. It's just not lining up.
Now are Henley and Brooks both still alive now?
Brooks is the one that died from the heart attack or underlying health conditions while he was in jail. Henley has proposed 3 different times to get his sentencing down. They have refused it all 3 times. He is now 68, I think is what it said, 68 or something like that.
Okay.
And he is still currently in jail, alive, prison. Now, there's one report that I found very interesting that I wanted to make sure I wrote down. So back in 1968, 2 years before he started, quote unquote, his reign, the candy shop workers reported on multiple occasions, 10, 20, 25 times, saying that Dean was taking nylon cord by the bundle and industrial plastic sheets by the pack home with him every day. He was also known to dig really deep holes to, quote unquote, bury spoiled candy.
Spoiled candy.
Spoiled candy. So, how long was he doing it before 1970?
It sounds like he had started doing it.
I mean, you don't dig really
So,
deep holes to bury spoiled candy
right.
or take bundles of nylon cord and packages of freaking industrial plastic sheets.
And that number of 40, what'd you say, 48?
44.
44 went missing.
Yep.
So that was at that same time then?
That was in the same time. That was between 65 and 73. Yep. So that pretty much concludes the podcast, Brent, on Dean the Candyman Coral, who,
Ooh.
yeah, he remained the most prolific serial killer in the United States until 1978. I'm sure you know when 78 Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy were both attributed to over 30 plus murders. Now, this is where you were saying, oh, there's somebody else that had a torture board. That was John Wayne Gacy.
Was it Gacy? I remember
He called
somebody
it
had a torture
he
board. I
called it
couldn't
his
remember who.
rack.
The rack.
Yep. Gacy, so what I wrote down is Gacy admired Dean's work and was inspired to do the things he did and build his quote unquote rack after reading on the Houston mass murders.
See, there's somebody else though that has one that was called the torture board also.
Oh, I don't know about that one. But here's another thing. You know how Dean told Henley that he had a slave ring?
Right.
Gacy and Dean, now this is the kicker. This is where I'm going to end it. Gacy and Dean were both in the same sex trafficking ring.
No kidding, really.
Mm-hmm. That's my podcast, dude.
I didn't know. I thought I knew the story of him, but I don't think I did.
It's a very interesting one.
He was called the Candyman. That made sense. Why the Pied Piper? Just luring the kids.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, because the Pied Piper, the whole entire lure behind him, the thing about it was, yeah, he did away with the rats, and if you didn't pay what he's supposed to have been paid, then he'd take the children.
Correct.
That's the reason you had to pay the piper.
You got to pay the piper. But that's it, Brent.
I enjoyed it.
I did too. I really did. I actually really, truly enjoyed digging in on this one, and I know we're going to have a lot more. Do you know which one you're going to do on the next main episode to kind of give a little bit of insight for our audience?
I do. I'm probably going to be covering William Lee Neal, also known as Wild Bill Cody.
Nice. And he was, we already covered one axe murderer from back in the day, right?
Correct. This will be another axe murderer.
Okay. All right. So more of a new age axe murderer?
He was during his murders actually happened within days of each other. It was in 1998.
Okay. Well, let's not give too much information on it.
Okay.
We gotta let them be able to soak in the intense weight. So, well, that's it. You got anything else, Brent?
No, I don't really have anything else to add. I want to thank everybody again for tuning in, listening to the stories we have to tell. This is Strange Embers. We appreciate everybody being here.
And we can't wait to have y'all back on the next episode. Have a good night.
Good night.